Border Podcast, an inside look at California politics and the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and very excited to be joined by a new guest to the show today, Assemblymember Josh Lowenthal from Long Beach. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thank you, and a proud member of the Josh Caucus.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
You're the first member of the Josh Caucus, besides me, of course, that has been on here.
Well, there's another 18 in line, so you have lots of guests to look forward to.
That's right, exactly. Also, I don't know if I told you this, but you're the first Democratic member of the Legislative Caucus to come on the show. So I appreciate that.
I wear that as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
We need to look past the labels.
Absolutely.
Because that's what Californians expect of us.
Yeah. And we're excited to have you. I think, it's funny because we've scheduled a few, like Carlos Villalpudua was going to come on and got caught in his district. And then Isaac Bryan was actually going to be on a couple weeks ago. We're trying to reschedule that right now. But it was like the day right back from recess. And he's like, I think we were all dragging that day. Like, he just couldn't get up here in time.
He's also right about to get married. So
that's true.
He's got a lot
of other things going on in his life.
So let me ask you really quickly. Your viewers, do they tend to be more on the right side of the spectrum, or do you find that they're sort of open?
I found it's a good mix. A lot of the folks that listen are, my constituents. We also have a lot of the Capital community that listens. And so I would say I've heard from a number of different folks actually that listen. So I think it depends, but it's a hard thing to measure too, because I don't actually know, precisely how to measure that.
I think you'll find out today whether or not, based on the feedback that you get.
We'll see the feedback that we get today.
Exactly.
Although I will say it's funny, just because we'll get emails sometimes from constituents that have listened to the podcast, or our staff will get emails, and they'll ask us the question, like, when are you going to have a Democrat on the show? And we've had to tell them, like, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
well, I applaud you.
Yeah.
Not only for having a Democrat on the show, but just for doing the podcast as a whole, because what I find, whether you're Democrat, Republican, it's irrelevant. There seems to be this wall between legislators themselves and the broader electorate, and people don't know how to sort of permeate that wall.
Yeah.
And I think you do a fine job with this, and it's important for people to know who we are, what our priorities are, what makes us tick, what our wiring is.
Yeah.
So this is good stuff.
Well, and I'm all about just kind of having those conversations, right? Like, let's talk about stuff and see what we agree on, right? And what we disagree on. But honestly, at the end of the day, I think it's really important that we're talking. You know what I mean?
Well, that, my friend, is part and parcel of being in the Josh Caucus.
Exactly.
So here we are.
Exactly. We're a very talkative caucus. Hey, so a few questions to kick this off. Yep. I wanted to give you a softball up top. Just, can you tell us a little bit about your district and all that in the place you represent?
Well, as everybody knows, I represent the finest district in the state of California. My district is Long Beach, where I grew up. The LBC, awesome. I actually went to high school with Snoop Dogg and Cameron Diaz.
That is amazing.
Long Beach Poly High School. I'm class of 1988. Snoop is 87. Cameron's 80. Snoop's 89. Cameron's 90. So they were 1 and 2 years younger than me. The district also includes Carson, Signal Hill, and Catalina Island.
Okay.
So truly, truly interesting district. Yeah. I like to say the thing that really distinguishes Long Beach from the rest of California is the people of Long Beach are all proud of each other from all the different walks of life.
That's awesome.
It really is. There's a harmony and a vibe in Long Beach that I have not been able to equal anywhere else in the world. Carson is also truly, truly diverse community. To get to the legislature, when I was walking, canvassing door to door, it was remarkable to me. In one neighborhood, you'd go from one house and it would be Filipino, the next house Black, the next house Samoan, the next house Latino, the next house white. I mean, and, real harmony within that community. So Carson has also its own unique flavor. Signal Hill is, the little city that could. It's remarkable. It has gone from an oil town, totally and completely reinvented itself, and is a commercial driver in the area. And then, of course, Catalina Island, which is raw California at its finest. And while we don't have homelessness, in Catalina Island, we also don't have water or broadband internet.
Interesting. Wow.
So, it's much more like a rural community, even though it's part of LA County.
That's
Really,
interesting.
truly fascinating. And I love my district. I feel so lucky to represent it and just happy to be here.
That's amazing. I mean, truly an amazing district. I got to visit Long Beach a few times. I lived in LA for a short period of time, not Long Beach.
Have you
sadly.
recovered?
Just while I was in college, Actually, there are things about LA I really miss.
LA's amazing.
And it's just an amazing place. And, a lot of growing up in Northern California, there's a lot of haters, right? Which some of that is sports, some of it's other things, right? But when my wife and I moved down there for a couple years, we were kind of nervous about it, and we just fell in love with it. You know? And we lived, maybe 30 minutes north of Long Beach, and it was just an awesome place.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's so many wonderful pockets of Los Angeles, and they all have different flavor, different texture. And the thing I think that is overwhelmingly part of the culture of Los Angeles is a lack of judgment towards each other. There's general acceptance of each other, which I would say is a little bit different than Northern California, as a matter of fact. And so we really relish in that down south.
It's funny because it's not something you would necessarily expect. I think if you're unfamiliar with LA, right, you kind of think of it as this giant city with all these strangers and people that, you just don't know each other. But it's amazing. And my wife and I's theory on this was that we were shocked when we moved down there how accepted we were. And how, I think a lot of people aren't from LA. They kind of end up there.
Most.
Right? Most people
Drawn
aren't
to that culture.
born in LA, right?
Yeah.
But they end up, people that end up there kind of become each other's family.
That's right.
Right? Because you kind of have to, right? You don't have, we didn't have family around in LA, right? So you kind of do that. And one of the stories I love to share is I remember one day I was on the Santa Monica blue bus, the big blue bus.
Oh, yeah.
Headed to work. And there was some mechanical issue. They kick everyone off the bus. And now I'm sitting on the bench of the bus. What the heck am I gonna do? I'm gonna be late for work now, And I was kind of stressing out. And I'm at this stoplight. I'm sitting on a bench. This guy pulls up in his Nissan at the stoplight right in front of me, and I just hear Josh, what's up? And I'm and it's the guy that runs the parking lot next to my work that I sometimes park at, when I have to drive. And he's like, "Are you going to work?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Get in. You need a ride? Let's go." And I was like, "Oh my God, this guy just saved my life." He just saved my, and it was just I'm in this giant city, right? I run into this guy who I don't know that well, and he offers assistance. And it's just incredible.
There's so much love actually in Southern California, and I think people mistake it. They don't know how to embrace it sometimes, not necessarily acclimated to it. The thing that we hear over and over again is people are fake.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of that might be misunderstanding, this sort of openness, friendliness, kindness, and acceptance that's, remarkable. It's different than anywhere else in the world. So there are a lot of transplants to Southern California, but when people get there, they don't want to leave.
Yeah.
So
no, it's cool. I wish it was more affordable. That would be my only gripe, because that's why we moved back to Northern California,
That's up to you and I, my friend. We got to work on that together.
That's right. We do. So what was your path to the legislature? Obviously you talked a little bit about running and stuff, but I know your family was in the legislature, and what kind of motivated and inspired you to run?
Well, I come from a family of public servants. My father served here in the legislature. Well, he started as a college professor at Cal State Long Beach, teaching psychology, and was involved in community psychology, so community response to things that are going on and the impacts to a community, so to zoning changes, to crime, community involvement, so forth, and was doing projects in the community and got involved in his local district on zoning issues that had taken place, the building of cracker box apartments in residential areas, and found that the incumbent city council member had been there for 16 years, was tone deaf to everything going on in the community. So my dad, as we didn't use the term progressive back then. He was a liberal, college professor, walked door to door and unseated a 16-year incumbent with virtually no money, zero institutional support, made his way to the Long Beach City Council, did exceptionally well in that environment, then was elected to the Assembly, later
Mm.
the state Senate, and ultimately United States Congress, and had a 30-year run in public life. And not just an amazing public servant, but a really amazing dad.
That's
And so
awesome.
I learned the values, the important values of giving back to your community and how you can effectuate change by being involved, how you build consensus, and not just with people that are alike from you, which is, emblematic of you and I sitting here today. It's building consensus across differences.
Yeah.
And that's something, maybe as a psychologist, he had exceptional training around. My mom also served in the legislature here in the state assembly. She was on the school board and the city council, and in her mid 80s, continues now as the president of the Harbor Commission. So runs the
Mm.
port of Long Beach, which is a massive economic going concern, not just for the region, but for the entire country. And my only brother is a judge, criminal court
Mm.
judge, trying the most heinous cases. So I've been around public service and always knew that I would be involved. I thought I might do it earlier in my life, but
Mm.
because my parents were elected officials, I waited till the right time. And I was the black sheep of the family. I'm an entrepreneur, business owner, very different than most in the Democratic Party, and was always involved in local nonprofits and supporting candidates, but waiting till the right opportunity.
Mm.
That opportunity first came in the 2018 cycle. I'm not a big fan of President Trump. And when he was elected in 2016, that incentivized me at that moment
Mm.
to take inventory of my life and see what's going on. And in North Orange County, the district right next door to where I lived had a really bombastic legislator who really didn't represent the changing needs of that community and was out of touch. And I decided to run in that race. I didn't make it all the way. But I came back to my home in Long Beach shortly thereafter and waited till the right opportunity. In 2022, there was an open seat,
Wow.
and I ran, and here I am.
Remind me who your predecessor, who was there representing it before you?
Patrick O'Donnell.
Patrick O'Donnell, of course. Yeah, yeah. No. Yeah, no, I know Patrick very well. Okay. Yeah.
Patrick is purely Long Beach in
Yeah.
every sense.
Yeah.
And he's been an incredible friend, incredible mentor, and was unbelievably supportive of me getting to this role. But, one of the things I learned most from Patrick is to be an independent thinker
Yeah.
and to try and assess and analyze every issue for its own merits and not to be focused on the rewards or consequences associated with going in that direction, to do the right thing at every opportunity. That's, what my parents certainly taught me as a boy throughout my entire life. That's what, political leaders on both sides of the aisle do that I truly admire. They make independent decisions based on
Yeah.
what's the best thing for the state, what's the best thing for the electorate.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I mean, you saw too in Patrick's final few years in the legislature, he became a lot more independent, and he started really kind of carving his own path, and that was something I always appreciated about him.
Yeah, and he remains a leader in the education
Yep.
space. He's now representing the school board associations, and so we're lucky. There's a lot of ways to be involved. You don't just have to be an elected official
Totally.
to
Yeah.
influence policy. There's so many different angles you can do it, and it's just great that we have somebody like Patrick who stays committed to bettering California and specifically our young people.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, he actually had me out last year. I think 2023 CSBA did their conference, and he had me come speak with Speaker Rivas. So it was actually kind of weird. I was this freshman Republican, I mean, I was from a school board. I did come from the education space, but and then the Speaker of the Assembly. It was pretty wild. So we both came and spoke, and Patrick had us out. It was great.
Assemblyman, if I can
Yeah.
give you a moment of credit here for a second, it's not that wild. One thing that happens up here is people can identify, certain skill sets, certain tool sets out of the gate. And even though you and I are both freshmen, I think it's very apparent to most that you are a problem solver
Yeah,
and that you're
yeah.
focused on getting to the core of issues and solving problems. You'll work with anybody to do so. And I think, that is probably why you were selected. And I think
Yeah.
that's probably why your colleagues hold you in such high esteem.
No, I appreciate that. It means a lot. Couple more questions, then we'll get into our discussion because I do want to talk about social media. I want to talk about some of the bills you're working on. Before we do that, what do you think is a common myth or misunderstanding or misconception of the legislature? And I know that's kind of a weird question, but I think like while you think about that, I think for me, it's that a lot of there is a lot of disagreement, no doubt. But I think there's also a lot of common ground that gets built, and I think it's probably not as picked up in the media quite in the same way when we agree on things and when we work together on things as the stuff we disagree on, right? So I think that's definitely an area where I find it interesting. But
Yeah, if I could piggyback on that, I think the reason you and I, and I'm sure we'll get to talk about this, are
yeah,
so interested in the issue of social media is because it plays to our anxieties. It is most profitable when we're online the most, and people behaviorally tend to search out their anxieties that keeps them
hmm,
on longer. And a lot of what that's resulted in, to nobody's surprise, is this massive division amongst us.
yeah,
So the media, no doubt, because they're in the business of business, and the more clicks, the
gotta
better
get
off,
clicks. Yeah,
are going to be following the things that divide us. But I think that you're absolutely onto something. There's probably 20% of issues that actually divide us, and
yeah,
there's
I agree.
80% of issues where they don't. And I think you and I in particular gravitate towards
Sure,
that 80% as being our focus. By the way, we can't be a specialist in everything. We got to
that's for sure.
specialize in
Yeah,
certain things. So
yeah,
I've found I like to specialize in the areas that have, common ground,
mm,
bipartisan appeal, and that, as I tell everybody, that all Californians expect us to resolve and not
yeah,
be focused on the divisions amongst us.
yeah,
So I'm gonna validate what you said as to
yeah,
that. And then there's one thing that I want to bring up
yeah.
after having just gone through the appropriations committee
Oh
process is
yes,
I thought before I was coming up here that everything was transparent and democratic.
yeah,
And that's not the case whatsoever. There is specific functions within our state legislature and our government that are clearly anti-democratic, dare I say autocratic.
yeah,
And you know, I think that institutionally there are many that benefit from that. Uh, but it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair that in the appropriations committee or committee chairs
yeah,
effectively act as fiefdoms, and they can change legislation, not hear legislation, immediately stop it.
hmm,
And there's no levers, there's no
yeah,
controls between the electorate and those people. Those are appointments. They're done in coordination with leadership. These are backroom discussions. We all call it around town a black box. And I think it's unfortunate. And I hope that it changes. And I'm
yeah.
going to look to do what I can to see that it changes over the next decade.
Yeah, it's really fascinating you bring that up because I think that has been a bipartisan frustration for as long as I've been around, kind of the policy world that you really, when it comes to appropriations committee and when it comes to things like the budget process sometimes too, right? All of those decisions, while they kind of have this appearance of being, oh, well, it's going to a committee hearing and it's getting, all these things, it's really concentrated in the hands of just a few people. And I think it makes it really difficult, right, for us to go back to our constituents when we say we're up here fighting for them and representing their voices to really have those discussions when you've got that concentrated power.
Yeah,
So
and the truth of the matter is there are other levers that could be used that are more transparent.
yeah,
We could vote against them. We rely upon
sure,
those mechanisms to kill legislation specifically so that we don't have to take a public vote on those.
and
And
that
I think
is
that's
yes,
unfortunate.
yes,
I think that that needs to change. I think that, the more the electorate becomes aware of those processes,
yeah.
the less satisfied they would be in those. And I can't validate it under any circumstances.
No, I
You know?
totally agree. And like I mean, how many times do we have conversations and I'll just say this like where I mean, it could even be among legislators where it's like, yeah, I don't love that bill. but I don't want to vote against it. So I'm going to vote for it, and then appropriations can deal with it. And then I don't have to deal with it, right? Like you know what I mean? Like these are actual things. The appropriations committee is almost used as this buzzsaw, for things that we don't want to like get in trouble over,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? It's like
That's exactly what it's used for.
Yeah.
There are some benefits from a management standpoint to doing
Sure.
this, so let's not discount
Oh, of
those.
course,
There are
yeah.
pros and cons. I just think that the cons fly in the face of our Constitution, and
Yeah.
I really think it can be egregious. By the way, appropriations committees should only be about appropriation. It shouldn't be about policies. So when
Right.
you see unilateral policy changes
Yep.
made to a bill that have nothing to do with appropriation,
Yeah.
to me that stinks. That's answering your question. I think that's
Yeah.
the
I-
biggest myth or misunderstanding I had coming into this gig.
I think that's an awesome one. So thanks for pointing that out. One last question for you, because I've always been curious about this.
Only one?
Well, and then we'll get into your bills, because I want to talk about your bills.
All right.
But the California Legislative Democratic Caucus has 93 members if you count Senate and Assembly. I know you're Assembly, so you deal with that caucus, but it's still, what is it, 62. So it's a big caucus of legislators. How do you guys manage that? Like, how do you manage that many people that, when you have disagreements? I mean, I can tell you as a member of an 18-member Republican caucus that we have our own disagreements, and we're a much smaller ship, so to speak. So just curious, like, what your perspective is on that.
There are a broad spectrum of ideas and ideology within the Democratic caucus. So I would not say that the 62 members are aligned, and that's not just going from the left to the center of the spectrum.
Yeah.
That means geographically there's a
Yep.
broad spectrum. People come from agricultural areas, rural areas versus urban core. We have a Native American legislator who brings a completely different perspective to
Yeah.
our caucus. And all of our diversity caucuses, bring differing perspectives. So I would say, by and large, it's a massive challenge, but it's not a challenge of ideology. We figure out ways to align along those. Quite honestly, it's a management challenge because whereas you have only 18 members, so all of you are like 3 vice chairs or however it sort of works.
Yeah.
Across the Democratic caucus, there's too many mouths to feed.
Yeah.
So I, for example, do not have a committee chair. I was not given a committee chairmanship, which is okay, actually. I'm on the leadership team and really enjoy being part of the speaker's leadership team. And I found my skill set lends itself to be sort of glue amongst this caucus and bringing people together and across our caucus with my Republican colleagues as well. But it's just very, very challenging for people who are here in the era of term limits that only have a finite amount of time
Yeah.
and have a subject matter that they want to specialize in. And by the way, the best advice that I got, Assemblyman,
Yeah.
before coming up here was pick a major, pick a minor, and then you got your general studies.
Yeah.
And once you have your major and you become the expert in that, you want all your colleagues to come to you and get your opinion on those things. And so I think, most legislators come with that in mind, that they have either something that they've already worked on in their career or in their public elective life, or just things that they know dynamically that the state of California needs at any given time, and they want to focus on that. And for better or for worse, there is a committee that oversees that as a policy area, and they want to rise to the top of that. And it's just too many members of the caucus that can be the leader of that space. And so it creates competitiveness within the caucus itself.
Sure.
And that can cause divisions. And, if you don't have strong leadership that can, work those things out across the caucus, then it can, be rife with problems.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I would, really want to tip my hat to Speaker Rivas. Before that, Speaker Rendon, both of them, did such a great job individually connecting with each member of the caucus and making sure that each of us found a way to sort of live out our, policy dreams, as it were.
Yeah.
In the context of it being too large. So it's an ongoing
That's awesome.
challenge.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a few people that are upset, and
That's
we got to figure out
that's
how to
unavoidable.
we got to figure out how to bring them back into the tent.
Yeah, no, that's great. I have to validate your comment about being the glue. I mean, it's so funny when I see you on the assembly floor, mending tiffs between Republicans and Democrats. It's just great. I mean, it's just like you're like you have this like ability to be the whisperer of all these fights that we're having, these small fights, and just really bring people together. So I appreciate that about you.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you.
It's really incredible to watch, especially when we're all sitting there and we're just like, what the heck is happening?
Well, the sad thing is, and as we see from some of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, they're rewarded for stoking the fires of those division, by their base.
Yeah,
right.
Correct.
And
absolutely.
For me, that just doesn't fly.
No, 100%. The incentives there are definitely unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
So, but no.
And I believe temporary. I believe that the electorate is getting to be exhausted.
I agree.
By this. I think that they want us to move past this. I honestly think that they're exhausted by the party system that we have right now. That's why we see the majority of new registrants are registering right now, or the plurality, I should say.
Yeah.
No party preference. They're independents. Yeah. They're telling us that they're fatigued by it.
I think it's interesting because I think there are a lot of people that feel politically homeless, right?
Yeah.
They don't have a home. Their options are limited, right? And that's why I really encourage, really both parties, but I try to encourage my own party, right? Is that we need to be a big tent party, right? We need to be welcoming, accepting of a lot of different viewpoints. Now, you obviously have your core principles and you don't violate those. I get that. But there are a lot of things outside of those core principles where you can be welcoming. Right?
Totally.
And it's just, yeah. So
good. I really underscore the point you just made. Yeah. I feel that the enemy within right now is intolerance. Intolerance on the right, intolerance on the left, punishment if you don't fall in line. We're seeing it right now. I mean, I'm a Jewish American.
Yeah.
Very active in my Jewish community. In fact, my oldest girl just had her bat mitzvah. My middle is going to be having hers in the next year. And I'm a Zionist. I believe very much in the state of Israel being the Jewish homeland. In fact, I lived for a few years between college and graduate school in Israel.
Wow, that's amazing.
I was a non-fighting volunteer for the Army. I worked on a kibbutz. I studied Hebrew. I worked for a time at an immigrant absorption center, and I became very connected to it. But I'm also very pro-Palestine. I believe in Palestinian homeland. I believe in a two-state solution. I believe in the 1967 borders should be the template off of which we work. I'm totally and vehemently against the settlements in the West Bank. I think this war needs to end immediately. I am not a fan of Netanyahu whatsoever. I think Israel needs to have elections right away. But why am I bringing this all up to you? Because right now in the Democratic Party, we have this air of intolerance as it relates to the war, as it relates to the concept of Zionism. Over 90% of Jews in the world are Zionists. Half the Jews in the world live in Israel. They're all Zionists, and about 80% that don't are Zionists. And so when people try and say, that they're not being anti-Semitic, they're being anti-Zionist. For the 90% of us that are Zionists, it's very hurtful, and we don't agree.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of that within our own party. So right now, the hotbed of anti-Semitism in the United States is in California.
Yeah.
And that is ignited by the far left, the progressive, so many of whom are not anti-Semitic under any circumstances, but they just don't understand or are unwilling to understand the connection between this, very, very heavy criticism and the slippery slope of it, of anti-Semitism. So, trust me, we're having a tough time in our party alone on this one topic. And, Republican Party has its share of issues
for
that
sure.
it's
Yeah.
struggling over. Choice,
Yeah.
a big issue. The woman's right to choose, which I think really is a libertarian issue that government should not necessarily be involved, which is traditionally a conservative value. But same thing, you're punished on certain topics if you don't fall in
Yeah.
line, as opposed to rewarded for being an independent thinker.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. And the, interestingly, so this episode is going to release a little bit later than we're recording it, but we are recording it the week of the Democratic National Convention. And there's a lot of like concern. Like, I don't even know what's happening as we're recording this, right? About kind of the potential, tension, right, over this specific, this issue at the DNC. So I'm hoping for the best this week for the DNC, that it's not, doesn't bubble up, but it's definitely a pain point right now, and it's really hard.
Yeah,
So,
I think what everybody wants, they just don't know how to get there, is unity across the country right now, is a form of unity. And unfortunately, the way that we're getting our information,
yeah,
the way we're synthesizing and processing information is not lending itself to unity.
yeah,
So, Assemblyman, we have to be intentional talking about it in forums like this one. Whenever we talk to the electorate, we need to, make those values part of our daily actions with whomever we're dealing with, and lead by example in that regard.
yeah,
So that means unity within our own parties, unity across parties, unity across cultures. It's time. We
Yeah.
need to have that. So
yeah. No, I appreciate that. That's actually a good transition into our next topic, especially your comment about how we're getting our information.
Yep.
Right. So, one of your big priorities, and I think you and I have found a lot of synergy on this topic, is kind of addressing the harms caused by social media and kind of, I would say, this ubiquitousness of smartphone use especially among young people and the youngest people in our society. You have some legislation, AB 2481 and AB 3172, addressing social media, and then you and I have also teamed up on AB 3216, which is this bill to limit smartphone use during the school day. To really not so much about, I guess indirectly it's about social media, but really about the device and kind of the portal to which people have access to social media. But I wanted to give you a chance to really chat about those first two bills, because I think I've talked a lot on this pod about my smartphone bill. But, tell me what, you're doing on the social media space and kind of why you're doing it.
yeah, thanks for asking. Thanks for having me on the show to talk about this. So I have been a tech executive prior to joining the legislature. I was the general manager of Plum, which is part of Mint Mobile. You've probably seen all the Ryan Reynolds commercials.
Yeah, I was
one
just
of our
going to say
owners.
Ryan Reynolds.
Company was just sold T-Mobile, actually. It's a successful exit. I was the president at freeconferencecall.com. I owned a phone carrier business in West Africa, network in 10 countries, West Africa. And in all of these experiences, I've really learned, sort of how to think and what the incentives are of executives in the tech space. And, in the process of maximizing shareholder value, you're not necessarily concerned about what are the emotional and social impacts of the users. It's just not the thing that you're keyed into. That's kind of how things were in the early days of an automobile. They didn't really think about seatbelts were not the first things that you thought about, or safety bags, or crash testing, or all of the very rigorous things. And just like when filmmaking was concerned, the Motion Picture Association of America hadn't been around to create and self-regulate ratings of its films to really, alert the, what potential impacts could be from watching that content. Well, I'm not only an experienced tech executive, I'm also a dad of 3 girls.
Yep.
And they're 14, 12, and 10. I have a laboratory right in front of me. And when you combine, what I see with them and my past experience with some of the data points we have right now, Josh,
Yeah.
it's alarming. Let me give you a few of those. Suicide rate for young people is up 62% since 2011. If the number one job of government is protecting its citizens, and maybe even especially so for minors, we're failing. If we're enabling the suicide rate to grow at that much, eating disorders, the same rate, anxiety and depression even higher, off the charts, and particularly for girls. So, and all of this since 2011. We have our Surgeon General out there, the one that we entrust the most to tell us what should be healthy and what's not, and how we change our behavior, is extremely critical of what's happening in the tech space and calling for change, even as much as putting a warning label on top of these spaces so that we can all assess the damage the same way you would see on cigarettes or alcohol. And that tells us what we're dealing with here. So I personally feel, very, very connected with this. This is my major, the thing that I want to work on. And it also works with the things that you and I had talked about before. For whatever reason, thank goodness, this is an issue that has not been hijacked by partisanship at all. I'm extremely proud to join you on your bill. So let me talk about a few of these. AB 3172 is about negligence. It's about assigning a damage number when harm is caused by negligent activities that's been proven in court. The harm and the negligence have to be proven in court, and then it assigns a damage. We came out with $1 million, up to $1 million per individual, per young person. And these, of course, are lawsuits that can involve huge amounts of people, class action suits, and so it can be a very, very high figure. But the important thing there to note is that puts social media on par with every other consumer product that young people use: toys, helmets, skateboards, car seats, you name it. They all have those, product liability associated with negligence, the harms defined in the law. And for whatever reason, we've allowed social media to get this far. The other thing that we've allowed them to do, and this is my bill 2481, AB 2481, is we've allowed social media companies to be completely unaccountable to our voice. What do I mean by that? Well, for whatever reason, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when the internet was coming into its prime, was being born and coming into its prime, these products, which were categorized as free, we all socially accepted and managed our expectations that they don't need to have customer service and they don't need to be involved in our communities at all. That there could be this wall, because they were free, of this information superhighway. So now, fast forward 30 years later, we have some of the largest companies in the world nearing $1 trillion valuations, and you can't call any of them. If you have a problem with YouTube, who do you call? Or Google, or Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, you name it. None of them have any ability for you to escalate issues. All of them, the only way to escalate things, they respond with AI. Everything is automated, and they don't understand the nuances. So they don't understand the nuances in content if somebody's throwing up gang signs and it's actually making your community less safe, or if somebody's doing self-harm online and they don't seem to catch it, or somebody doesn't understand the nuances of content of one Native American tribe towards another, or they definitely don't understand the context around cyberbullying because they don't know the sensitivities of any given individual. So AB 2481 does something very simple. It creates a verified reporter system. What's that? Verified reporter is like a blue check. So if I'm Snoop Dogg, there's a blue check next to my name, so everybody knows, oh, that's actually Snoop Dogg and Snoop Dogg's account. It would be a similar to a blue check system, a verified system for school principals and school psychologists. So if they raise something with TikTok, if they raise something with Snapchat or Instagram and say, hey, can you please look at this content? Does this violate your terms and conditions? Those companies would have to respond with a live person within 24 hours. Now, it doesn't say how they have to respond. They can say, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Doesn't violate our terms and conditions. Probably what would happen is they would say, thank you for bringing this to our attention. And then they'd take it down because they don't want to cause alarms. And these aren't random people. These are the people we are already trusting legally with our kids for half the day, every day.
Yep.
These are school administrators and school psychologists. The industry has opposed both of these measures.
Yeah.
And it's truly unfortunate the approach that the tech sector has taken on all of these reforms. Your bill, my bills, our colleagues' bills in this space, they automatically start with opposition, and they don't seem, in my experience, my brief experience, to really want to try and work things out with us and try and get on our page or get a sense of what our vision is and figure out how to create a safer environment. They just are trying to deflect.
I think that was one of the most glaring things about the very first, I think it was like one of the first hearings. I think you brought your bill to the privacy committee where I sit as well. And, just I think at one point I even asked one of the opposition folks, like, so, okay, you don't like this bill, and that's fine. You can not like this bill. You can impose this bill. But what's your solution, right? Like, how are you going to fix these harms? Because at the end of the day, I think, it's impossible to deny that there are harms. We've seen it in the statistics. We've seen it in the stories in our communities of the kids that have committed suicide. It's not just a number. It's an actual kid, right? It's an actual child with, parents in our communities that are losing their lives because of cyberbullying or whatever led them to that place, right? And so, just posing the question to these folks in the industry, so what is your plan? And the answer is really they don't have a plan.
Self-regulate.
It's self-regulate. It's exactly. And to me,
we'll fix it. Don't worry. We're studying it right now. We've got all these initiatives to make it better. Trust us.
Well, and I just want to tell you this, you're a very persuasive guy, and that's a big part of why.
Is that a compliment?
I think it is. It's a compliment.
All right.
But you certainly did a lot to convince me on this bill. But I'll tell you another thing that helped convince me on this bill. I think it was the 3172 bill that you were talking about before. Was their opposition and how they responded to questions and the level to which they denied the harm. I think that was, especially to your point, you have kids, we both have kids in the same age range. You have 3 daughters. By the way, there's no argument that this is having a even bigger impact on girls than it is on boys. Now it's having impact on everyone, but the impact it's having on girls is substantial. We see that bear out in the statistics, but to know as parents that no, we know that there's harm. You can't come here and say there's not harm because we can see it.
And I appreciate you saying all those things. The toughest thing for me, man, is I know that these companies, these tech companies, are thoughtful. Yeah. I know that there are, their leaders are parents too. They're deeply concerned with the way. I don't think they had any idea, 10, 20 years ago, the level of responsibility they'd have.
Yep.
As it relates to being, safeguarding our mental health. And I honestly believe that's their responsibility, just the same way automobile manufacturers have to safeguard our physical health in the way that we're going out and about. The way that products are manufactured and done, they have to have our physical health in mind. I honestly believe, Assemblyman, that the only way out of this morass ultimately, and I don't know how to do this, so don't hold my feet to the fire on how we get there, but we're gonna have to figure out how to measure mental health. Apple and other products are measuring our physical health, or if you wear an Apple Watch or any of these devices, they measure all these metrics in your physical health, how many steps you're taking, for gosh sakes. and your heart rate and all these things that are reminders for you to be healthy in the way that you're conducting your daily lives. And we're going to have to get to a level where we're measuring and indexing for mental health within the context of privacy that is not violating our privacy under any. And that's a needle that's going to be really, really tough to thread. But the alternative of that, conveniently looking the other way, is leading to disastrous outcomes. And it doesn't just take a suicide to see that.
Yep.
When we're at the dinner table and I ask my girls to, put their phone down.
Yeah.
They're visibly agitated for moments. It is to divorce that, even for a few moments. It takes them a while to decompress. I now find myself actively choosing family vacations where we go off the grid.
That's great.
Where there's actually no cell phone service to take away that pressure and that wanting to be connected. So we're doing we go on houseboat. We do things like that where we're literally camping, we're literally away. And it takes a full day for not just them, but for me too, to totally decompress and not need it anymore. And once I get to the other side of that, it's glorious.
Yeah.
I don't know how to tell you, any other different. And I love technology.
Yeah.
I don't want these companies to go away. In fact, I want them to be more successful. I want to work with them. I know you do too, in finding the right secret sauce where we all feel confident that people are online more, not less. Because right now we have these perverse incentives where we want, especially kids, to be online less. They want to be online more because they make more money off our kids when they're online more. And so we're in a loggerheads right now.
No, I could not agree more. In fact, we're not going to go too deep into it just because I want to be respectful of your time. But, I had linked this article in the notes from Jonathan Haidt, piece in the Atlantic, and the phone-based childhood now. And it's really an excerpt. I don't know if it's an excerpt, but it's essentially taken from his book, which is The Anxious Generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. And, if we talk to some of our colleagues, I know Buffy Wicks has read the book, and
I've read that book.
You've read the book as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, you kind of know what it goes into, but it's amazing how it really underlines some of the things you just said. I mean, number one, pointing out the fact that everyone thought they were doing a good thing, when they, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of advantages to the smartphone. There are a lot of pros to connection, digital connection, and the technology that we've seen. There are certainly pros. What I think we didn't account for, in this process is that there's also downsides, there's also harms, and then we have to account for that, right? Yeah. But, just to hear that you have 3 daughters, I mean, is interesting because in the article he breaks down how, the video game craze really had a bigger impact on boys, right? Like boys got really, to a much larger percentage than girls, sucked into video games and kind of addicted to video games when those were, coming out. But this phase, this social media phase, has really had a much larger impact on girls, particularly under the age of 16. And that's why you see the suicide rate and depression rates for girls even higher than boys, which I think is something we have to be cognizant of. I only have one daughter, but I can see that too. I can see the impact it's having on her, to your point. And I think it's just really important that, we as legislators, we have to take some action here. So.
Yeah, I think, I'm not very active in social media anymore. I used to be a lot more active. I have accounts as a legislator that my staff run, to be quite honest with you. And on the personal one, I post once in a while, but it's really about staying in touch with folks. But I do use social media to get information. Excuse me. And, at age 54, I still have to reconcile and grapple with my sort of avatar personality and life versus my real one. And the way I interface with people, over in the social media and the digital world is very different than the way that I interface with people in the real world. And, that's age 54 and somebody who's in elective office who can really, navigate challenging social situations. When you're 12,
Yep.
you don't have that you're not developed enough to have that yet.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
so hard to understand that. And while, many think that we can just simply curate our online experiences and shut the rest of the world out, the way young people are communicating with each other today is very different than the way we
Yeah.
communicate with each other. They tend to use group chats.
Yeah.
So my girls, one of them's doesn't have a cell phone, but the two that are in middle school and high school, they're in group chats and it's rife with cyberbullying. And that are some things that are really affecting girls, more than boys, as their bodies are changing.
Yep.
A lot of body image, body dysmorphia, things around that. And it's too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
They need to
they're
be able to
inundated.
develop in a healthy way. They needed to
Yeah.
develop without that pressure. And you don't even have to be in a group thread to be bullied
Yep.
by that group thread. Sometimes 10 girls will, or boys will do a group thread where they're making fun of somebody who's
Yep.
not on the
Not
thread.
in the thread. Yeah.
They hear about it, and of course, they go to school and have to deal with it. So, by the way, where I'm getting a lot of my information? I talk to school administrators
Yep.
and teachers, and they
Yeah.
are at wit's end. They're dying for relief right
Yep.
now.
No, 100%. It's interesting. Yeah. You talk about some of what Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book is about, cigarettes and the addiction of cigarettes and how kids were getting a hold of cigarettes. But even at its peak in like the 90s, like 27% of kids were smoking, right? We've never ever seen anything like this where you literally have 90+% of a generation participating in such an addictive, medium, right? And he talks about this study that was done of 1,000 college students where they asked them one-on-one, this is to your point about the social pressure, but they asked them one-on-one, like, what would we have to pay you per month to give up your device, right? And it usually, or give up your platform, so like Instagram or TikTok or whatever it might be, like, what would we have to pay you? And usually it fell around $50 a month or something like that for me to just come off of social media, right? But then they flipped the question around and they said, what would we have to pay you to if we got all of your friends off of it, right? Like what would the cost be if we not only got you off of it, but we went and took everybody else off of it too? And in the study, it actually a lot of the responses were people would actually pay money, not be paid money, if everyone came off of it.
Wow.
Because it's just it's one of those things you feel like you have to do.
Yeah.
But interestingly, a lot of people don't want to do it.
I certainly feel that way in my job as
Correct.
an elected official,
Yeah,
right?
I agree. Likewise.
And
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's
well, and that's what's vexing about this is there's no clear answers.
yeah.
And there's no manual for how
Right.
we actually regulate something like this. The beacon for me is listen to our experts in the field of health and medicine and science. What do they tell us? What's good for us and what's not? It's very, very clear as it relates to kids right now. And so I think we should all gravitate around, what's going to make our kids healthier and achieve. That's our job. That's our responsibility
Yeah.
as elected officials, as parents, as community members. We need to do that. We need to listen to, people in the education community as well. What do they think is the best path forward right now? And, if there's any of you in the tech space that are listening right now, we want to collaborate with you. I can't emphasize that enough. We want to work with you. We would like to be having conversations with the thought leaders, the decision makers inside these companies. It is our goal, and I hope I can speak for you here, that you become more successful, not less.
Yeah.
You shouldn't look at these regulations as being restrictive on the current model. We should be looking at is how do we create a model where our incentives are online, and that incentive is wellness. Wellness should be our guiding light. We only get one life, we need to make the most
100%.
of it.
And you know, I think at the end of the day, like parents obviously play a big role in this process too, and
Of course.
communities play a big role in it. But I've talked with parents and I've talked with administrators just like you have, right? And at a certain point, they need an assist from their, you know, legislators,
They
right?
do. They
And
do.
I think that's why what's kind of motivated both of us is we want to help this. We want to assist parents in addressing this
They
this,
do.
this
And I
challenge.
I, I want to state the obvious too. You made mention earlier that there are a lot of benefits with social media. Well, there are a lot of kids who don't have understanding parents, and social media is an outlet for them to be able to
Sure.
connect with people, and that prevents them maybe from doing
Sure.
things that could really, take their life in a bad direction. So I want to make sure that
Yeah.
also give credit for the sector, because there's a lot of ways that you can learn about yourself,
Totally.
about, things going on that can, take you in a productive direction too. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are a
Yep.
lot of incredible things that you get. By the way, you also get to see what your ex-girlfriend from 20 years ago still doing. There's a little bit of
Yeah.
value in that too.
Yeah.
No, seriously, I that's a joke. I do think, listen, the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah. I
We're
know.
not going back.
We're not going back.
We need these guys to
Yeah.
be rewarded for caring about our wellness.
No, 100% agree. I think we can wrap there. If you have any final thoughts, I did want to ask: does Snoop and Cameron Diaz ever come to the reunions? I mean, like how does that even work?
I've got two stories for you there, my brother. Cameron Diaz, my friend Cameron Diaz, who I love, is a friend and actually is a max donor to my campaign.
Oh, wow,
So,
look at that.
Really,
Wow.
really proud of that, or my original campaign. And Snoop, not only does he attend the reunions, but in his class, which remember, he's a class
Yeah.
behind me,
Yeah.
at his 30th reunion, at the end of the reunion that he attended, all of a sudden several buses pull up, and everybody from the reunion went to an after party
Oh my
that Snoop
gosh.
organized for
Oh,
everyone.
man.
This guy is LBC to the core.
I love it. I
And
love it.
even all the way at the Paris Olympics, everything's about his hometown. Never forgets where he's
Oh
from.
my gosh.
And we love him for that. And
That's awesome.
he is our greatest ambassador.
That's great. I
Yeah.
love it. Speaking of LBC, you see Sublime is back with his son as the new lead singer. I don't know
Yeah,
if you
that's
did-
my generation too. I grew up with those
That's
guys.
pretty awesome, man.
with
That's
Jacob
pretty
Noel.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna need to check them out next time they come around. So,
Absolutely.
hey, I appreciate having you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And honestly, again, to your point, I mean, these are issues of bipartisan concern,
Yep.
and I'm really thankful for the work that you're doing on this to try to really shine a light. So
Right back at you. Very proud to be joint authoring with you. I have a sneaking suspicion you're still going to be in the legislature as long as I am. So we're going to be around each other for a long
Yeah,
time. We have a lot of
absolutely.
good work to do. So let's get to it.
sounds good. All right, Josh, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
See you later.